Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. I'm really going to start getting into the swing of things here for the 2025-2026 NFL season. Sorry for the delay, slow start to this season here. Recently bought a house, actually, so moved in there. Going to get the backdrop all set up nice here soon as well. But wanted to get you guys some content, and this one I'm going over is 5 receivers that I really think are potentially league-winning caliber players here. These are guys that I think have the potential to really give you a very significant overperformance relative to their ADP, and guys that I think can actually crack into being like weekly starters and potential like fantasy superstars this season. A league winner is not a guy that you're drafting in the first round that performs up to par unless he just laps the field like Jamar Chase did last season. It's also not a guy that you draft as the wide receiver 50 and performs as the wide receiver 30. Those guys, they're nice, but they don't necessarily make a huge difference in terms of what your odds are of winning your league. So these are guys that I think have these potential to significantly outperform their ADPs and are guys that I'm definitely targeting on my rosters this year. So hopefully you guys enjoy this one. Have any questions or comments, just let me know in the comments below, and then I will have some follow-up videos going over the running back, quarterback, and tight end positions as well. So yeah, super stoked. Let's get into it, guys. Starting things off with kind of a controversial one, but a guy that I'm actually really high on this season is going to be Jalen Waddle. And I think we all know that Jalen Waddle is an incredible talent. We've seen him put up monster fantasy performances before. We saw him get hyper targeted as a rookie, really utilized close to the line of scrimmage, then have a couple of really strong years with Tyreek Hill to just really airing it out downfield. And then last season was just sort of a really tough situation for him. Got banged up a lot. I know he played, I believe, 15 games last season. But if you had Jalen Waddle in fantasy, you saw almost every other game he was coming off the field at some point. We saw Tua miss a significant period of time as well. Jalen Waddle historically has performed significantly worse in games without Tua, and it makes sense. Tua is a good to fringe Pro Bowl caliber quarterback, and then you've got really a situation in Miami where they've not had a competent backup at all. So there's been a huge decrease in production for the entire offense anytime Tua goes down. And Jalen Waddle is generally the first one to get impacted by that because let's face it, he's been the wide receiver 2 in this offense and the wide receiver 1, and Tyreek Hill is going to command a healthier target share, especially when the backup comes in. So it makes sense that Jalen Waddle certainly did disappoint last season. But his ADP now is finally at a point where the risk is certainly baked in here. He's currently being drafted in the 5th or 6th round, going as the wide receiver 31 off board. So you're drafting this guy as like a low-end wide receiver 3, and we know he can be a top 10 wide receiver. We've seen him do it before. He's got the talent. He was a top 10 draft pick in the entire NFL. And there's just a ton of upside. There's a lot of paths towards him having a lot of success this season. Tyreek is already injured, should be good for the start of the season, but things are just really weird surrounding Tyreek Hill. There's the possibility that he gets traded at some point. I just don't think Tyreek Hill is even the same player. We saw him really regress on a lot of behind the scenes and just overall production metrics last season. There's a lot of opportunity here for Tyreek Hill to really regress this season even further, and we could see a scenario where Jalen Waddle is the wide receiver 1 in Miami, even if Tyreek Hill stays there. There's also talk of a potential Jonnu Smith trade. He's a guy that certainly commanded a lot of targets. You've got Devon Achane. Managed to stay healthy last season, but if that doesn't happen, that opens up a lot of targets for Jalen Waddle. The fact of the matter is there's a ton of opportunity here for Jalen Waddle to be super relevant in this offense, and then maybe this offense just finds their way back to what they were a couple years ago, or maybe they're able to push the ball downfield a little bit more. The offense was not really fun to watch last season. It was basically screen passes to Jonnu and Achane over and over, and it kind of worked for them, but it seems like something that'd be really easy for opposing defenses to adjust for. Maybe they've got to open it up a little bit more, and I think Jalen Waddle, coming into the season fully healthy, could certainly have a monster year. And again, with the ADP right now, even if he busts, he's not a huge detriment to your team like he was last year, drafting him in the 2nd or 3rd round. If he ends up being horrible, he's not a guy that you have to play every single week like it felt like last season, and he's a guy that could easily be a top 10 wide receiver. And then one other thing I just want to highlight, I don't love talking about schedule this early in the season, but when we're talking about league winners, I think it sort of makes sense to at least take a look at the playoff schedule because you're not going to win your league if these guys don't put up big games then. Jalen Waddle, the fantasy playoffs, he gets a game in Pittsburgh. That one's not fantastic, although I think Pittsburgh's defense could potentially regress a little bit this season. And then he gets games at home against Cincinnati and Tampa Bay. So those week 16 and 17 games could very easily be shootouts, games that I'm definitely going to be super stoked to start pretty much every Miami player in. And I think we could see a situation where Jalen Waddle goes nuclear in the semifinals and championships this season. Next up, we've got Chris Godwin, another potentially iffy one here for a lot of people, but I think people forget just how fantastic Chris Godwin was last season. He was the wide receiver 2 prior to injury last season, finished the season as the wide receiver 2 in points per game, and I know it's on a small sample size, but we saw Chris Godwin really return to form and be an elite wide receiver that we've seen him be before, and it really corresponded really strongly with just him being moved back into the slot, a position he's really dominated in, and one that doesn't necessarily require you to be as explosive of an athlete as well. So even coming back off of injury, there's still plenty of opportunity here for Chris Godwin to be fantastic off of that injury. We've seen him come back from injury before as well, so he's not a guy that I have any questions about. You can see if you go watch the film of him right after he got his injury. Really gruesome injury if you guys saw it last season. The first thing you can see him say when he's on the card is back to work. So this is a guy that works incredibly hard. He's a guy that's going to have he's going to be super motivated. The Buccaneers were not worried at all about the injury. They gave him a massive 3-year contract extension in free agency this year. So the Buccaneers clearly think he's going to be ready. On top of that, Mike Evans, he's only getting a year older. Certainly, Mike Evans still a really good player, but there's potentially more opportunity in the offense there. Egbuka, first-round draft pick. I like Egbuka a lot, but he's a rookie. We're not going to see him come in and steal targets from Chris Godwin. If anything, I think Egbuka probably just moves McMillan off the field. And the fact of the matter is he's being drafted as a wide receiver 34 right now. You're drafting him as your wide receiver 4, maybe your wide receiver 3. But if you're drafting him as wide receiver 3 or 4, he can start slow with this possibility here that he's not necessarily ready to start a training camp. And that's okay because you're drafting him at a spot where you don't need to start him in week 1. And I don't think it'd be shocking at all for him to come back in week 5 even, or, get slowly ramped up throughout the course of the season. And then you get to the back half of the year and he's performing as a top 10 wide receiver over that stretch. And that's really the stretch of fantasy games where we want our guys to be peaking. Chris Godwin, like I said, fantastic player, a guy that I'm not worried about coming off the injury just because we've seen him do it before. This is an offense that we have a lot of faith in. The Buccaneers clearly felt comfortable with it. And beyond that, Tampa Bay runs 3 wide receiver sets a ton. They ran him 71% of the time last season, good for 9th in the NFL. There's a lot of room for all of the weapons in this offense to stay on the field, even if Egbuka just emerges immediately and takes snaps, because you'll just have Egbuka and Evans on the outside with Godwin in the slot, which is exactly where he exceeds anyway, or excels. So I like Chris Godwin a lot. The ADP is fantastic, and I'm going to have a lot of Chris Godwin on my rosters this season. The next wide receiver I want to talk about here is going to be Josh Downs. And the reality here is I just think Josh Downs is an incredibly talented player. He missed most of training camp last season, was still clearly the wide receiver 1 on this team. That's really tough for a guy to do in a team where he was just coming into his second year. He's not exactly super established in the offense. They drafted Adonai Mitchell in the second round last year. There was a lot of opportunity for Josh Downs to sort of slip into being irrelevant there. You see it happen all the time when guys get injured in training camp. It's just tough for them to come out and be dominant. And Josh Downs was far and away the best wide receiver on this team. You've got Michael Pittman sort of seeming to regress as a player. He was dealing with back injuries all last season. Didn't undergo surgery. It's tough to know if that's going to be able to be something that Pittman can overcome. And they, I think, upgraded at quarterback this year. It's sad to say that Daniel Jones is probably a significant upgrade for the passing game relative to what Anthony Richardson can offer you. But he's currently being drafted as the wide receiver 46, which is just incredibly low. He's a low-end wide receiver 4 right now, and that's just silly. He was the 19th most targeted player in the NFL last season. He had the 5th highest route win rate. There's just a ton of behind-the-scenes numbers. I could go on and on about his first read target share, his effectiveness versus zone, effectiveness versus man, the guy that's used downfield a little bit too. Josh Downs is an incredibly talented player, and I think in a better offense, you could see Josh Downs be fantastic. And I think this offense should improve a little bit this year. Daniel Jones is a quality player. He's still extremely young. He's going into just his 3rd season, and like I said, he kind of had a missed opportunity to really progress as a player during the offseason last year due to an ankle injury. So this is an opportunity here for Josh Downs to truly break out here in year 3. He was 13.1 points per game in fantasy last season. I think that might surprise some people that last year he was the 28th best player or best wide receiver in fantasy points per game. People don't give him that kind of respect. Clearly, he's being drafted as a wide receiver 46, and I think really there's only room for him to improve here. He's a young ascending player. The quarterback play can't get any worse than it did last season. This offense in general should improve, and I think there's a lot of reasons to be super excited. I know they drafted Tyler Warren. Potential there for Josh Downs to maybe slide into being the number 2 wide receiver or target in the offense, but I don't think so. I think Josh Downs is a fantastic player. I want a lot of him. He's effectively free in drafts, so he's a guy that I'd love to get in full PPR. Guy late in drafts, I think could easily sneak into being like a fringe top 15 kind of guy if things break right this year. This one's going to be a little bit cliche, but I got to talk about Jameson Williams' potential league winner this season. Everyone seems to have him as their favorite breakout wide receiver this year, and I think there's good reason for it. I wanted to be a little bit contrarian, but I just couldn't. I think I actually kind of buy into this one as a guy that I think has the potential to be a fringe, like low end wide receiver one this season. He averaged 17 yards per reception last season. We should see an increase in usage for him again this year as well. He only had 90 targets last season, which is incredibly low for a guy that managed to finish the wide receiver 19 overall, currently being drafted as the wide receiver 24. So people are expecting him to regress a little bit, and it makes sense just because typically you see these guys that are hyper efficient on low volume. Generally, the efficiency comes down a little bit as the volume goes up, but in an offense like this, I think there's actually room for Jameson Williams to maintain that level of efficiency. I think there's room for those touchdown numbers to go up as well. And like I said, he did this with 91 targets. He was 40th in the NFL in targets, managed to finish as the 19th overall wide receiver in fantasy. So you can see how much he can do with a little. If this guy manages to find himself at 105, 110 targets this season, that's going to give him another 150 receiving yards, probably 2 more touchdowns. And like I said, he was wide receiver 19 last season, so just that little bump would put him right up into that like low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2 territory. And Dan Campbell has been incredibly vocal about Jameson Williams being a guy that they're going to lean on in this offense. They haven't been that adamant about that or that vocal about that in previous seasons. Previously, it was like, hey, this is a guy that's still getting his feet wet. He's a guy that's really learning and earning his way onto the field. And now the narrative is that Jameson Williams is a superstar in this offense, and he's a guy that they really want to get involved. We know Amon-Ra is going to be the centerpiece of the offense. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to get used a ton, but there's enough room in this offense for a lot of players to succeed, and Jameson Williams is going to be a big part of that. On top of that, this defense, maybe they get healthy and come back, but we saw over the back half of last season when this defense was giving up a lot of points again, and if that can happen, there's just a ton of room for this Detroit Lions offense to have to put up 30, 40 points on some weeks, and in those games, Jameson Williams can easily be a guy that goes out and has legitimate 200-yard, 2-touchdown upside, and just playing against Jameson Williams on any given week, it's absolutely horrifying. He's a guy that can single-handedly beat you, and I would much rather have that on my roster than on my opponents. So I like Jameson Williams being drafted as the a wide receiver 24 right now. Pretty low in drafts. It's makes him like a 4th or 5th round pick, and that's the kind of guy that when you're looking for a breakout or a league winner kind of guy, generally those wide receivers in the 5th to 7th round that you see a path towards potentially being like a 2nd round draft pick the next season. That's a good way to look at it, and Jameson Williams fits the bill for that. He could certainly come out here and have a 90 reception, 10 touchdown, 1,300 yard kind of season and be like a low end wide receiver 1. And if that happens, Jameson Williams is absolutely going to be a top 2 round pick next season. And I think that's very much in the range of outcomes. So I like Williams. I want him on a lot of my rosters, and I would just certainly much rather have him on my roster than against it. And the 5th and final receiver I'm going to talk about today is going to be Chris Olave. And I get it, I might have a problem. For whatever reason, I can't quit Chris Olave. But I really do think that at his current ADP, Chris Olave has the opportunity to be a league winner this year. And I think there's a lot of similarities in some ways between him and a guy like Jalen Waddle. They're guys that are incredibly talented wide receivers that, for whatever reason, just haven't necessarily put together the kind of fantasy seasons that we all know they can. Garrett Wilson kind of fits the same bill there. I know Garrett Wilson's going a lot higher in fantasy drafts, but I think look at the receivers that Chris Olave is being drafted around right now. He's currently being drafted as the wide receiver 37. Chris Olave is by far the most talented wide receiver being drafted in that kind of range, and it's just tough to get a player that's going to command this much of a target share with that much talent, that much deep threat ability as well. So there's a lot of explosive plays available to Chris Olave. It's just tough to find that kind of player in the middle of the late rounds here. Top of that, the Saints are really going to suck this season. Just top down, they're one of the worst rosters in the NFL this year. We had this sort of surprise retirement of Derek Carr, so you're probably looking at Tyler Shuck as the quarterback in week 1 here, and that's not great. I get that. That's not going to lead to a necessarily efficient season in terms of yards per route run. Touchdown upside certainly going to be a little bit limited here for Chris Olave, but if he can stay healthy, which the risk is baked in there certainly with the concussions, I know that you're certainly one concussion away from potentially him having to miss an entire season, so that's not great by any means. But with the draft capital right now, you're spending a 5th or 6th round pick on Chris Olave, and this is a team that could certainly be near the top of the league in pass attempts. They have not been able to run the ball very effectively. Alvin Kamara still really can't run the ball very effectively at this point in his career. He's mostly a pass-catching running back. This is a team, the defense is bad. They're going to have to throw the ball a ton. And I think that the best case study for why Chris Olave can come out here and be fantastic this year is actually look at what Malik Davis did last season. You had a horrendous roster. some of, if not the worst quarterback play in the entire NFL. And Malik Neighbors still went out there and was like a low-end wide receiver one for you in fantasy, and that's just because he was far and away the most talented wide receiver in the room, and he was a guy that was hyper-targeted, and he was able to stay healthy enough that he held up to all that usage and ended up putting together a really solid season. And I don't see any reason why Chris Olave can't go out there and do that this season. I think Malik Neighbors is just a little bit better than Chris Olave, but I don't think it would be too hard for Tyler Shuck to play a little bit better than Tommy DeVito did last season. So I think there's room for this offense to be better than what the Giants was last season. And, compare like Rashid Shaheed, Darius Slayton, like really similar kind of just like deep threat only kind of players. There's no reason Chris Olave shouldn't be the centerpiece of this offense, and I think the offense is going to have to run through him, and he's a good enough player to put up really solid numbers. So getting him as your wide receiver 4, a guy that I think has legitimate like top 15 wide receiver upside, it's certainly something I'm excited about. Last season kind of lost to injury, but even in his previous 2 seasons, he was finished as the wide receiver 25 and 19. Hasn't had good quarterback play his entire career, so there's no reason for him to be drafted this late other than the injury risk. And when I'm drafting guys in these middle rounds here, I'm not playing for I don't want a weekly flex play here. I want a guy that can potentially significantly outperform his ADP and actually be a difference maker for me. If Chris Olave gets a concussion, has to sit out the rest of the year, you took him in the 5th or 6th round, you can recover from that. You can go on waivers. You can find a player that you can play in your flex. And typically when you're drafting guys here, your 4th wide receiver, that's a flex play. So you can recover from Chris Olave not being the superstar that he has the potential to be. And if he ends up panning out, he could be the reason you win your league. So Chris Olave is a guy that I want in a lot of my rosters. He's a guy that I'm definitely going to be targeting, and I know there's risks associated with it, but that's why he's being drafted this low. He's way too good of a player to be drafted where he is right now. So that'll do it for 5 league-winning wide receivers this season. Up next, I'll be going over 5 running backs I think have the potential to be league winners for you guys this year. If you guys have any comments or any guys I didn't mention that you think should have been on this list, feel free to let me know in the comments. It's always super fun interacting with you guys there. Any disagreements as well, let me know in the comments. I love just interacting with you guys as much as I can. If you guys like the video, please do give it a thumbs up, which helps me out quite a bit. And if you made it this far and you're not subscribed, please do subscribe. I'm going to be putting out 3 videos a week the entire rest of the off season, and they'll be going even more in depth as we get into the regular season as well. So really appreciate you guys. It's been a lot of fun. We got a lot of stuff coming up, and super stoked for it. Peace, guys.
Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.